Let's be honest, the excitement of a big AAA announcement just doesn't really hit the same anymore. Mostly because we all kind of know what we're getting into at this point. Of course, with a few exceptions, there's always some good games here and there, but a new trailer drops, it looks incredible, fans get super hyped about it, and then release day comes and it's buggy, it's incomplete, it's missing core features, or it's just straight up underwhelming overall, all while certainly having a very fully finished price tag on it. We've kind of been stuck in this cycle for years now, and it's only really gotten worse as we make our way to the halfway point of 2025. So today we're going to break it all down. Why are AAA games still launching unfinished in 2025? What's behind this trend? Why are billion-dollar gaming studios not fixing anything? And is there any real hope for things changing in the near future? Let's get started. The short answer to give you is that it comes down to this mix of corporate pressure, unrealistic development timelines, overhype, and just the increasing complexity of modern game design. But that's not the whole story, and you guys aren't here for the short answer, so let's take a look at the long answer. The problem isn't just that games are broken at launch, right? It's that they launch unfinished entirely. They can be good games at launch, just simply with missing features. Poor AI, cut content, unavoidable bugs and glitches, unstable servers. I'm sure I could keep going, and these are games that are sold at full price, but still playing like they're in early beta testing. Games here and there over the decades have occasionally hit or miss, but this trend really hit the mainstream market with the launch of Cyberpunk 2077 in late 2020. CD Projekt Red has spent nearly a decade hyping this game up as the next evolution of open world RPGs, and on PC, and honestly even today in 2025, it kind of is the next evolution of open world RPGs, but at launch, specifically for console players, it was very far from it. I mean, complete disaster, like crashes, your character gets stuck, there's cars falling from the sky, entire missions that wouldn't complete, some cutscenes that just would not progress entirely. CD Projekt Red apologized, and Sony even delisted the game from the PlayStation Store, but the damage was done by that point already, and it was honestly an unprecedented move for not only such a high-profile release, but really just any release to get taken off the store. To their credit, CD Projekt Red, like I said, has developed the game into a fantastic game today. Many people say that it's just as good as they anticipated it to be at launch. It just kind of took a little bit longer to get to that point. But exactly like I just said, the damage was already done. It showed us just how far a publisher would go to meet a deadline, even if the game clearly wasn't ready, because if they would have just booted up the game and played for 10 minutes on Xbox or PlayStation, they would have known that this game was not ready. And the worst part is that developers that were adjacent just did not learn from this mistake at all. It didn't stop with Cyberpunk. In fact, it seemed to have gotten worse. In 2023, we got Redfall, which was developed by Arcane, and it's kind of a studio known for immersive sims like Dishonored and Prey. Redfall was supposed to be their first co-op multiplayer game, and it kind of felt just like an experiment gone wrong, like a trial. There was clunky gameplay, really bad AI or NPC components, and an environment or a world that just kind of felt empty, unfinished. The reviews were awful. I mean, the game got completely slammed and player counts tanked, and Microsoft, which had acquired Arcane's parent company, Bethesda, had to basically publicly acknowledge the failure, which isn't necessarily something that Microsoft is used to doing. Speaking of, then there's Starfield, which is Bethesda's first new IP in 25 years or something like that. This was the big game of 2023. It had the hype, it had the marketing, it had the legacy, but when it finally launched, the response was definitely mixed. Sure, it worked. It wasn't a complete broken mess like some of these other games. In fact, I decently enjoyed the game. It just wasn't particularly exciting. Fans found the gameplay repetitive, the exploration was much more shallow than what was originally promised, and the procedural planets, I guess, were just empty, and many accused Bethesda of playing it too safe. And while Starfield wasn't unplayable, like I said, it absolutely felt unfinished for a game that was in development for 7 or 8 years. Some features that were promised, like the seamless, planetary flight or whatever, were just completely cut. And then your user interface was clunky, and that was personally my biggest complaint about the game. The AI was just alright, but, it wasn't really anything to write home about. It felt like a game that just needed another year to kind of bake in the oven, but they couldn't afford to miss their release window. Slightly more recently, we've seen games like Skull and Bones from Ubisoft, which finally launched after over a decade in development, so you would think it was going to be some insane game that just broke all the metrics, but it was very underwhelming on almost every front, from what I understand. I didn't play this game personally, I didn't get my hands on it, so from what I hear from the Reddit forums, Twitter, whatever, it was supposed to be a gritty naval survival game, but ended up feeling like a shallow live service shell, kind of just in classic Ubisoft form. Players called it repetitive, boring, clearly missing core content. Another half-finished game released because it just had to be. There was pressure. And while we're on the subject of Ubisoft, we might as well mention Star Wars Outlaws, which was released in the same year as Skull and Bones and was one of the biggest flops of the year. And those two flops in that year were what largely led to the demise of Ubisoft as we know today. And you can't really talk about 2025 gaming without mentioning the day before. This game went from being one of Steam's most wishlisted titles ever to a complete ridiculous failure. There's no other way to really frame it. It was marketed as like a massive open world MMO set in a zombie ravaged post-apocalyptic city, which I guess, is a little bit cliche, but like I said, the marketing was just phenomenal and people were buying into the hype, myself included. And then when it launched, it wasn't just not as good as people expected, it was like barely functional, full of bugs. Like just with the basic mechanics, there was no real survival systems and nothing that really resembled the features shown in trailers. It was just shown to hype people up. And then after just a few days, the game was pulled from the Steam store, completely delisted, completely disappeared. The studio is gone. It was basically just like a video game rug pull, so complete scam. But it fooled millions of people because of fabricated hype and, I don't know, some slick trailer, I guess. So what is going on here? Why does this keep on happening? Why is this persisting? A major part of that answer is just the business of video games. Because that's exactly what it is. It's a business. These are multi-billion-dollar projects and publishers are under enormous amounts of pressure to, hit deadlines. And I get it, because delays cost money and missing a quarter's, target earnings metric is bad for a company's stock. It's bad for the public image. So games ship when they have to, not when they're ready. Studios are becoming more comfortable with just relying on post-launch patches to fix what they couldn't finish in time before the launch. So in other words, we, the players of these video games, are just kind of becoming the QA team of the developers, the quality assurance team. Another problem kind of answering this whole question, at least from my perspective, is the pre-order and hype culture, which I guess I sort of spoke about earlier. Game publishers spend millions of dollars just in marketing these titles before they're even close to done, which is fine and all in theory. It doesn't break any rules. I mean, we get cinematic trailers, fancy collector editions, influencer previews, social media hype, and so of course expectations just skyrocket through the roof. But by the time the release rolls around, there's no way that this game can live up to that hype. But because so many people already pre-ordered, the publishers still make their money even if the game completely flops. Then there's also the issue of scale. I mean, games are just getting so much bigger and more complicated nowadays. You have open world games with like hundreds of systems interacting, real-time weather, complex AI, branching narratives like multiplayer modes, live service elements. I mean, supporting all of that across multiple different platforms is a nightmare, even for like a company like Rockstar handling that with GTA 5. Even they failed for a little while at least. So quality expectations are going up much quicker than anyone was really anticipating, and it's hard to keep up, I guess. And often, instead of cutting scope, studios just try to do it all, and so they fail to do any of it well. And let's not forget crunch culture. I mean, developers are working 60, 70, 80 hours a week trying to hit these deadlines, and the result isn't higher quality, it's just more burnout. And so the developers are getting less creative and they're missing out on these massive bugs that are just breaking games. And no one has the time to test thoroughly, so crunch isn't leading to better games, it's leading to broken ones made by people that are just kind of done with it. They're just kind of tired. Now, to be fair, not every AAA game is launching completely broken. In recent years, in fact, we've seen a lot of bright spots with just a few rotten apples thrown in there, but Baldur's Gate 3, for example, released in 2023 after years of early success and became a massive hit. It deserved all the awards and success that it got. Elden Ring, despite being insanely ambitious and massive, was just as awesome as everyone anticipated. So what is the solution, I guess? It's hard and, much easier said than done, because there's no way as consumers that we could have known that something like Cyberpunk was going to be as bad as it was at launch. So we can't just say like, oh, don't buy games that aren't good at launch if we don't know, you know what I mean? But I think supporting developers who prioritize polish and transparency is really the key. And if the consumers can stop rewarding broken releases, publishers eventually are just going to be forced to change one way or another. Again, it's much easier said than done, but in theory, that's just kind of what comes to mind. And then secondly, I think we need to normalize delays in video games. For some reason, it's so frowned upon, but I don't see it as a failure. And I respect any studio that has the balls to delay a game to get it right. Now, if they delay it and it still sucks like Skull and Bones, that's a completely different story, but for the most part, it's a sign that a studio actually cares about quality, at least to some extent. When a game gets pushed back, we should applaud that decision, not attack developers online, because that's just where more of that crunch culture comes in. And that's why I'm so happy that Rockstar decided to move GTA 6 back, because way too often fan pressure pushes studios to just rush releases. And we have waited far too long for GTA 6 to be anything less than life-changing and perfect at this point. So more studios just need to take notes from Rockstar, honestly. If more studios were like Rockstar, I think we'd probably be in a much better place, for the most part. So here we are in 2025, the cycle is just continuing, more trailers, more hype, more launch day patches, but for the most part, it's just more unfinished games. That's the main idea of this all. It doesn't have to be this way. If studios are brave enough to push back against unrealistic timelines and expectations and just make quality games rather than just striving for some bottom line, we could get back on track. Because I don't know about you guys, but I'm completely sick of spending $70 on a game essentially just to be a beta tester. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments, if you agree, if you disagree. If you enjoyed, make sure you leave a like and subscribe. And besides for that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.